Well, on to the story now. Today, the 3rd of December, is International Day of Persons with Disabilities, a day to promote the rights and well-being of persons with disabilities in all spheres of society and development. Tobeka Lwana, an inclusivity advocate, is a person living with achondroplasia or dwarfism. She joins us now via Zoom. A very good morning to you, Tobeka. Thank you so much for making the time to speak to us today.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
As usual, there's quite a lot to go through, but let's see if we can get through most. One of the big global conversations is around the description and wording in reference to persons living with disabilities. What are your thoughts here?
I think it's as broad as it can be because persons with disability vary. There's varying conditions or categories of people living with disabilities. Even people that need special care can be classified as people living with disability. So I don't know. There's a lot of conversation, but I find it very inclusive, all-encompassing as it is. A lot to debate, but a very, very serious issue for today when we talk about inclusion, that everyone must be included, whether you feel or you physically appear to be disabled or you live with some limitations of some form. That is all disability, going all the way up to mental illness even as a disability that needs consideration.
So that varied nature that you speak about, does it complicate efforts to bring about equality for this sector of our society?
I think it does when people look at it at a very linear way, where they think of disability in terms of someone who is limited in terms of mobility or someone who's limited in terms of eyesight or hearing. So there's a lot of other visibilities that are not, or disabilities, that are not visible, that are not as easily identifiable as that. But it's just very important for society, especially in the employment sector as well as in the commerce sector, for those that have the responsibility to make sure they hire as inclusively as possible, to go out and seek all forms of people or all types of people who live with types of limitations that may leave them, excluded, to just make sure, because every society, in all families, in all communities, there's people that live with disabilities, and those people need to reflect in our workplaces. They need to reflect in terms of the type of people we do trade with. So we need to be very sensitive as we do business, as we employ, and as well as in the education sector as well, that we are as inclusive as possible.
So perhaps a reminder to our societies today in terms of why disability rights matter.
They matter because all disability rights at the core of it are human rights. And human rights mean they at the heart of it, they say that we all have a right to exist. We all have a right to interact, to participate and belong. So basic human rights are also disability rights. It's just as simple as that. So it should not even be singled out as disability rights. It's just basic fundamental human rights. We need to give people with disabilities access, the same access that everybody wants, the same level of participation, freedom to relate, to play in society, to move in society, to trade in society. Everything that you desire, people with disabilities desire too.
So on top of all the challenges that are historical, a new conversation has come out, disability advocates sounding a warning on vaccine inequality for people with disabilities. What are your thoughts here?
So every time we talk of discrimination, whether you're talking about discrimination of women, discrimination of around race, you must always factor in an issue that there's another layer. If you're talking discrimination against race, you're talking discrimination against gender. There's always discrimination, again, added layer of discrimination against people with disabilities. COVID has really brought another layer of complexity when it comes to the issue issues or the plight of people with disabilities, because most of the people with disabilities, especially the disenfranchised ones, are in like very secluded spaces of society, very difficult to reach at sometimes because of their lack or limited mobility or lack of access and the advantages they are facing in life. So social services, Department of Women, the government, the NGOs, they need to help us as much as possible, make sure that people with disabilities, wherever they are not left behind. They are transported, they are given access, they are assisted so that they can be able to access the vaccines. Because as everyone says, as we always say, no one is safe until all of us are safe. And it's just as important for people living with disability. And also added to that is the whole issue around gender-based violence. Our studies have shown us in Southern Africa that people with disabilities are 10 times more likely to experience, violence, sexual violence, because of their disadvantage of living with disability. And so these are the issues that we need to be sensitive, be alert to, and really be agile enough to be able to stand in the gap and assist people living with disabilities.
On a day like this, it's tempting to only talk about the disadvantages and the challenges, but there are also exciting things happening in this space, aren't there? For argument's sake, a person such as yourself, who's self-sustainable, you're an advocate for inclusivity, doing fairly well in your life without assistance. Just take us through some of the positive developments in this space.
I think the whole consciousness around the discussion of inclusion has been good, and has been good also for people living with disabilities, because now we have a language that is easy for society to understand and latch on, and where we can plant the issues around people with disabilities. So we are coming back into the mainstream as an issue that needs to be, to be discussed, debated, and solved for. Also, I've seen positive moves also in the space of the creative arts, in the space of advertising and film, where we're seeing, models that are disabled being hired, working on the ramps. We're seeing fashion labels producing fashion for people with disabilities. I've seen, recently, I'd like to mention them, Cremora. They used, people with disabilities in some of their latest commercials. Momentum invited me as an example on a advertising campaign, where they were looking for women that stand for something, that stand for success, women that are aspirational. And in my wildest dreams, I would never expected myself to also be featured in that way as someone with a disability or someone who's differently abled. Also in the film industry, we are seeing across the world, not necessarily in South Africa, we're seeing roles, significant roles being casted for people with disabilities. And this is really important, because people with disabilities are part of society, and they need to reflect in the stories that are told about the modern day society that we live in. For me as an entrepreneur, it's I guess I have been fortunate to a degree that my disability is not as extensive as others. I have mobility, and also I have support in terms of my family and my friends and my immediate community that gives me enough boldness to be able to go out into the entrepreneurship space and go out and pitch for business, and be fortunate enough for having corporates to listen to my pitches and give me a chance. So there are some bright spots, there are some parts that really gives us a sense of we are making progress, but there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. There's a lot of push that still needs to be made. HR, managers, directors need to have their sensors on to be able to ask the heads of departments, why they're not recruiting people with disabilities or any other limitations therefore. So as you say, there are some successes, but there's still a lot of work.
Tobeka, like in many areas of society, there's always issues of class and privilege. Is this an impediment for disabled people who want to access help from government, from corporates, in terms of having a better life as a person living with a disability?
I personally believe that our government means well. They mean well. We've got the most progressive policies that accommodate access and participation for people living with disability. The issue comes with the will from corporates, the will from employers, whether for small business or big businesses, to actually, run with these policies and implement. The government makes it a requirement for government departments to make sure that part of their procurement goes towards, uplifting or supporting businesses that are run by people with disabilities. But this does not happen. Managers, directors don't work hard enough to find these businesses, to find these people, and they are there. So I do feel that the political will is there, the will from the part of the government is there, but it just fails somewhere in terms of implementation. And also I feel corporate South Africa's hands are not blameless, because they're also not going far enough to make sure that they support these policies, and I just feel that's where the issues, that's where there is a shortfall in terms of where we could really be making a difference, supporting people with disabilities in terms of employment, supporting them in terms of procurement policies, because once people with disabilities have economic autonomy, there's less likelihood of abuse where they are found in society, because now they are independent, they are able to live and support themselves. They don't really need, and if they need support, physical support, they can pay for it. They can pay for services that will look after them.
I just want to say,
financial autonomy, in my view, is critical.
Yeah. Actually, just to wrap up our conversation, I want to speak about the latest statistic that came through on unemployment in South Africa being at a record high, an all-time high of 34.9%. Do we know what portion of this statistic impacts people living with disabilities?
I actually did try and to find out from various contacts that I have, and at the time of this interview I actually didn't get those figures, but I can imagine already the gap when it comes to women. Women are most affected, and when you layer the fact that under that you can imagine how women with disabilities or even people with disabilities are affected. So the number would probably be even more than the number that affects women, because a huge chunk of our population is people with disabilities, and they're already the most disenfranchised.
Just a quick one, what are you doing today to mark the day?
What am I doing today? Well, I'm talking to you, and the rest, I've got deadlines. It's almost year end, so trying to get all my work wrapped up before we close the end of the year. But also just to be part of the conversations around the issue of people with disabilities. I've got very good relationships with the UN Women in Pretoria, so I'll be having some conversations with them around this and what we can do to fast track the work, especially coming out of Generation Equality Forum that was launched this year by Dr. Phumzile Ngcuka. So it's really time for us to move beyond talk and make sure that come next year we are heavy on the ground and we are agitating for real and meaningful change.
As always, it's great talking to you.
Thank you so much, Desiree, for having me. Thank you.
Tobeka Lwana is an inclusivity advocate and talking to us there about International Day of Persons with Disabilities.